This is Jason West from the Underscore Transformation podcast. Before we get into this week's episode, we felt that we had to address what's happening in the world today. After all, the global pandemic that we're all living through has resulted in a radical transformation of society and business in just a matter of days. Whilst we've been talking about business transformation over the past few months, the structured approach to delivering positive change in organizations, the situation that people and organizations face today is markedly different. In a crisis, we all have to make really tough decisions to protect ourselves, our loved ones, the teams we work in, and the wider society in which we all live. And, we all know 2020 is going to be a tough year. And we won't be the same when we come out the other side. Now, governments and organizations are going to be radically altered, as will be the way we work and our relationships with our teams, family, and friends. So if you or your family have been directly affected by the coronavirus, we wish you a speedy recovery and a return to full health. Now, when we get to the other side of this, and we will, the short-term decisions that we've made to deal with the crisis are going to need to be reviewed in the light of a new normal that's going to be quite different to the normal as it was just a few days ago. So whatever that might be, we're going to have to grapple with the world as it is as we get out the other side. So the need to transform ultimately will be greater than ever, which is why we're going to continue with the podcast series as we had planned. We'll also have some episodes coming up on working in remote teams, mental toughness in challenging times, and practical guidance for running a transformation program with a 100% remote team. So once again, thank you so much for listening. We hope you are all safe and well, and we hope that you find this week's episode useful and the coming weeks as we get into it. Welcome to the Underscore Transformation podcast. My name is Jason West.
And my name's Joe Ailes.
And together we're the founders of Underscore. In Season 2, we're focusing on implementation and the challenges that surround making changes to policies, processes, systems, and team structures. If you'd like to know more about scoping a transformation program, please take a listen to Season 1. Today's episode focuses on testing. One of the fastest and most assured routes to transformation failure is to shortcut testing. And it's a common story when speaking to operational teams who are struggling with new systems and new processes. Either end users weren't involved in testing, or testers weren't trained before being asked to test, or testing was simply cut short to hit a go-live date. In this episode, we aim to give functional leaders who might be new to transformation and large-scale systems implementations a broad introduction to testing and how to avoid these and other common mistakes that cause programs to fail. So, Joe, I think we can all think back to IT systems being rolled out in our careers that didn't quite work out as expected. What can our listeners do to avoid following others down this kind of well-trodden path?
Indeed, Jason, one of the first things to do is recognize that testing is more than just testing a system works. It's making sure that you're making significant changes to process, policy, ways of working, organization structures, people's roles and responsibilities, etc. So you should really thoroughly test these to make sure that to make sure that from a system standpoint, the system works as intended, and from an end-to-end process, policy, roles and responsibilities, etc., validate that what you've designed, it's fit for purpose. Having said that, I'm sure we'll probably be focusing a lot of this podcast on systems.
Yes.
And rightly so, but we mustn't forget that there is much broader testing principles, I guess, or practices that need to sort of be considered when you're implementing broad change, isn't it?
Yeah. So where do we start? What are the mistakes that people should watch out for?
The first mistake to avoid is believing that your software as a service solution is a plug and play and out of the box solution that doesn't require much testing. Even the most well developed software as a service products, technologies, require extensive testing to avoid configuration errors, process errors, data breaches, particularly taking into account data protection legislations. They're becoming tougher and tougher. Integrations, because it's obviously implementing a system that connects and touches other downstream systems, and any operational issues that you might experience because you're implementing changes to policy, process, operating model, ways of working, roles, etc. So all of these things need to be thought through. And to avoid these pitfalls, one of the first things I think organizations should do is hire an experienced test manager.
And that's typically somebody that you need to bring in from outside.
Definitely.
And unless you've got people in house that have extensive testing experience in the technology that you are implementing, rather than just being generic test managers.
Indeed, you need to have a test manager with ideally experience of the product that's being deployed, because it is easy to try and approach test management with software as a service technologies in a very sort of blueprint way, and that might have been used. They might have worked well with other on-premise technologies, but the same principles don't apply to cloud really. So we need to sort of think through. Organizations should really think through that. There are material differences to testing sort of an off-the-shelf SaaS solution to those customized on-premise products, and you are testing configuration choices. Really, we're not testing what organizations have customized from the ground up. So having that sort of knowledge of the system does help enormously.
Yeah, because you're not testing code as such, are you?
It's exactly.
It all works as long as you bolt it together in the right way.
You're testing the design decisions you've made. That have been applied in sort of configuration choices you've made to a particular piece of technology, really. So the testing is different to typical on-premise.
Yeah, because it's really easy to waste a lot of time if you approach testing a cloud-based product in the same way as you would an on-premise ERP or HCM system. Because you just waste a huge amount of time checking whether there's all these different bugs in code and all the rest of it, and frankly, that you're not going to find them.
Yeah, exactly.
And you just spend a huge amount of resource and time looking for stuff that just isn't there.
Yeah, the login button appears in the same place every time, so you don't have to test. The login button exists. You don't have to test that the user can enter their user ID and their password or whatever. That's part of the product.
Yeah,
absolutely. What you're needing to test is, okay, I've made a set of decisions in a way I want to run a process. Now let's play back that process in a testing world to see if it works out as we intended it to. And this is the most simplistic way of looking at it. But you don't have to spend thousands and thousands of hours testing things that, frankly, the software as a service technology provider will have done themselves to release the product out to the masses.
And there's some jargon around this, and there's a lot of jargon around.
There is an awful lot of jargon.
It's quite systems-y and quite ITE. So it's new language that we just need to kind of learn. And one of those is around, test scripts versus test scenarios. I think it would be helpful. Do you want to expand on that a bit more about kind of what is a test script, what's a test scenario, and what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, you're right. Actually, test scripts have probably come from on-premise solutions where everything had to be really prescriptive because you're testing something almost from the ground up that's been designed and customized and built to a particular organization's requirements. So you needed to go to that level of incredible level of detail to make sure that no stone left unturned, so to speak.
And they're the kind of step-by-step instructions.
They are. They're step-by-step instructions.
Enter this.
Yeah. Make sure you enter all of these data dimensions to make sure that we can enter data dimensions, making sure that we can enter data with decimal points and values of greater than a million in one particular field. And it's these types of things that organizations shouldn't have to worry about in a software as a service deployment. So you got a test script is really quite prescriptive, detailed instructions on log in as a X, enter this, open this tab, or open this bit of functionality in a system, enter these values into the system, press X or press submit or press next or whatever, and you go through this real prescriptive, detailed instructions. But to be honest, in SaaS solution, if you're going to that level of detail, mapping something out or describing what somebody has to do, it's just quicker to do it yourself, frankly. It'll take less time for you to execute that test than to write these prescriptive scripts for somebody to execute.
Yeah,
a test scenario is different. So a test scenario is you've made a set of decisions in your design workshops. There, might be I'm going to create a requisition, a purchase requisition, or create a purchase order. Anything that's a value of X needs to be approved by Y. Anything that's a value of Z needs to be approved by Y and Z. So you're making these sort of design decisions and these.
It's rules, really, isn't it?
Rules,
it's that business logic,
exactly.
The rules,
business logic that drive your business processes.
Transacted.
Indeed. So, and that's what you should be testing. So you're now creating a scenario that says, right, you are going to launch a series of processes, create a series of purchase orders, and let's make sure that all the purchase orders that we create test these various business rules that we've built into our business process. And you might create different types of scenarios. So you might say, right, we need to create a scenario that requires individual X to create a purchase order. But if individual Y creates a purchase order, then the rules might be slightly different. So these are the scenarios that you have to think about. So they're not scripts.
Yeah.
They're not detailed instructions on how to execute something. They are very sort of rule-based testing scenarios.
Yeah. So if you're a transformation lead or a program sponsor and you're just kind of having a bit of a check on what's going on with testing, I think one of those, just that 60,000 foot view is, do we have tens of thousands of test scripts or have we got a few hundred test scenarios? If you're implementing on-premise ERP or HCM, then absolutely you want the tens of thousands.
Yeah.
But if it's a SaaS solution, you really want to be seeing a few hundred test scenarios, and there's you can get into real trouble if you apply the wrong methodology to the technology that you're implementing.
You will, and you'll end up what will end up happening. And again, we've seen sort of some of these things with some of the organizations we've worked with. You end up focusing your energy on testing the wrong things, and ultimately you get a suboptimal solution that hasn't been thoroughly tested yet in the areas that it needed to. So it is very important. And the other group to include in this, and perhaps we'll expand on that a little bit later on, is sort of the process owners taking a lot more accountability around, right, okay, I've designed my processes to work in a certain way with these business rules embedded within my processes. I want to make sure as a process owner that the processes are going to work the way I want them to work. So they're so instrumental in helping the test manager create that sort of holistic test plan for each of the functional areas that are impacted by this change. And the process owner then really sort of thinks through the impact, not just on a system, but on their operating model, the team that are sat behind the system, the policy that they're looking to push out across the organization, and so on. So it's not the test manager is there to pull all of this together, but it does require significant involvement from those across the program to help pull together what are those test scenarios, what's that business logic that I really want to test thoroughly.
Yeah. Okay, we've hired our test manager. They've worked on a couple of implementations of the SaaS solution that we're implementing before, and we've made sure that they're going to take a proportionate approach to system testing. What's the first thing that your test manager really should be doing when they come on board?
They should come up with a test strategy. It's really the first thing, really.
Gotcha. And what should a good test strategy include?
I mean, we talked a little bit about the approach to testing, where scripts versus scenarios. So they've got to describe what's the overall approach, how are they going to approach their testing, what environment, what technologies are going to use, break down actually the components of testing. So in a minute we'll go into a bit of discussion around the different types, smoke testing, aspects of the system, the processes, etc. Unit testing, end-to-end testing, parallel if it's if needed, and user acceptance testing, UAT, as some people might refer it to. What data, what security is going to be tested? What data quality is going to be tested as part of the test strategy? How are individuals, I guess, going to be trained to effectively test the system?
Yeah, who's going to do what?
Yeah, who's going to take accountability for what areas, functional areas of the system, end-to-end process, policy, operating model, etc. And then they'll also need to include in their strategy. Okay, so we've done all these tests, but how are we going to document changes? How are we going to document defects? How are we going to document issues? All of that. So, and how are we going to triage all of those to actually unpick the ones that are perhaps lack of training versus those that are real defects with a process, a system, a policy, etc.
Yeah, it's that kind of high-level overview of what, how, and why various things need to be tested and who's going to carry those out.
Yeah.
But it really has to be formally documented. This isn't kind of something that you could just have floating around there. You've got to document it, and you need to push it through your governance structure and make sure the right people see it, review it, and approve it.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it's a fairly static document, isn't it?
From the very outset, yes. You should. It doesn't change that much. You might make iterations based on some lessons learned that you'd have picked up from different phases of testing. But realistically, you come up with an approach at the very beginning that should remain, the approach throughout the life of the program. You might change a few things, but it won't fundamentally change. So any sponsor and these documents should be, the strategy should be defined at the very beginning of the program. It's not something that you write at the end to pass some sort of quality audit or quality checks. It's something at the very beginning, and the sponsor and the governance structure, like you described, will need to validate the approach that the program is taking in its testing. Absolutely, and that comes at the very beginning. And if the sponsor starts seeing reams and reams of paper and details on scripts, then please challenge the program manager, director, test manager on approach. Because they shouldn't, in a SaaS implementation particularly, they shouldn't be going down that path. Yeah,
but if you are building software from scratch or you're implementing it on-premise, then you want to see those.
Then if it's absolutely, Jason. Yeah, if it's a high-level test scenarios against something that's been developed ground up, then be equally as worried.
Yes,
if it doesn't have enough detail. Yeah,
but So the strategy is fairly static, but must be done up front and approved up front. Yeah. But the plan's different, isn't it? The plan's a lot more kind of fluid, I guess.
Yeah. Because it largely depends on availability of resource, availability of technology, the system, availability of test environments, etc. And you've got and the program manager together with a test manager will need to line all of that up.
Yeah.
And again, when you're talking about testing, ideally you want people that understand the processes and understand, have got a good background knowledge of the system that they're perhaps testing.
Yeah.
And these resources are not typically they're not typically readily available, right? So you need to have your testing well planned so that resources are going to be available and potentially backfilled for the period of time that you're going to be testing. So So you've got to line all of that up.
So that resource planning and scheduling is one of the really important parts of the test plan. What else? What are the other kind of major elements of a test plan you'd want to see?
Okay, so who will be carrying out the testing? So again, very similar to the resource plan, but the logistics. Where's testing going to be done? Are you going to have testing done in a room with everybody in the room, which in some cases is the most effective way of doing it? Are you going to get people testing remotely? Who's going to access to what environment? What test platforms are you going to use? And prior to that, make sure that those test platforms are readily available with the users able to connect into it, etc.
Yeah.
And making sure that individuals that you're inviting in to do some sort of testing are adequately trained and know what they need to do.
Yeah. So trained on what particularly? Because we do talk about this quite a bit.
Yeah, on the system and testing practices. Very often, I've seen organizations just give responsibility to individuals to undertake testing. Right, go and run a process, but the individuals don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they're just following an instruction. Actually, what you want is individuals that are willing to break a system and take pride in that. Okay, you've given me a beautifully shiny product that you think works beautifully. I'm going to try and break it.
Yes,
and I am going to do stupid things to break this beautifully designed process. Test managers will probably hate it because these individuals will be picking an awful lot of issues and defects and bugs. When you put it through the triage, it might be things that realistically they're unlikely to happen because users are typically not that, dare I say, stupid. But but nonetheless, you need to sort of put these weird scenarios and weird sort of human behavior into technologies just to see what happens.
Yeah.
So that at least you're half prepared. So you need to have people with that sort of mindset let loose on systems and processes.
So I think the other thing you need is that kind of entry and exit criteria as well.
Exactly, just about to say that.
Each of those phases,
yeah, and be very clear what that is, and get your execs, your executive governance structures to approve it. And it might be that you'll come each phase will, maybe a 10-point check that says, right, I'm going to come out of each phase with no, P1 or priority 1 issues, almost your showstoppers. I'm going to come out of each phase with the user experience, the individual experience is in large parts positive, and the system, system or the processes are easy to execute, etc., etc. So you come out with these sort of 10 key bullet points, and you build all of your scenarios or scripts if you're doing an
on-prem type implementation
deployment. Yeah. So you come up with all of your scenarios or test scripts should underpin this exit criteria that you've developed, and you've got your exec to sort of sign off.
Yeah, and it really needs to be the process owners, kind of back to your earlier point, that are the people that are accountable for setting the criteria for the processes in their scope, so the ones they're accountable for.
Yeah, And then
the program director.
No, absolutely. And then the program director sort of, or the program
transformation lead,
the transformation lead actually joining the dots across all of it. So the handoffs between process A to process B, from process owner to process owner, are done sort of seamlessly. So each of the process owners absolutely take accountability for their functional areas, but they shouldn't lose sight. There are actually many, many processes or people's experience in a life cycle process, for instance, will touch different process owners. So the whole end to end needs to be managed really, really well.
Yeah, because after all, it's the process owners who are accountable for the efficiency and effectiveness of these new systems and processes or ways of working that are being implemented. So it makes sense that they're the ones to say, okay, well, it must meet these acceptance criteria or this set of criteria before we'll accept that we're ready to push the program on to the next phase, whether that's the next prototype or into a deeper level of testing or it's go live. So having really clearly defined and documented entry and exit criteria for each of the test phases is massively helpful, because it means that you make well-founded decisions as you move through. But it's kind of, you can set the bar too high, as you kind of alluded to. You can have no priority ones or only 3 or whatever it's going to be, whatever's appropriate. And if it's too high, you just get stuck chasing down every single minor bug that actually isn't an issue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there'd be if you have a plan or an exit criteria that says I'm going to clear every single bug that's been identified before I move on to the next phase. Then you'll be there for a long, long time, because it is. Some of them, frankly, are not possible to do because the technology doesn't allow it, or actually, you know what, we've come up, we need to re-engineer we'd have to fundamentally re-engineer something we've designed to address maybe a P3 issue, and it just doesn't warrant fixing, right? So you document it, you say, you know what, I'll close that one, or you identify issues that you pass from that you're not going to block the entry of the next sort of phase, which is the next prototype, because you've got one issue that could still be resolved in the next phase. So you just have to sort of be pragmatic in a way. But there are certain things that you shouldn't allow to progress until you've fixed them.
Yes.
Because
Can you give us some for examples there?
Yeah, you've got a fundamental error in one of your processes, or in a configuration of one of your processes that doesn't allow the process to complete. So in that case, now we need to make sure that we complete that process. That is a showstopper.
Yes.
But a minor one might be, actually, we've got some help text or a bit of instructions that are missing, or don't have the right wording. Okay, fine. Yeah. We'll fix that later on, right? So it's about being pragmatic. Or an integration's failing dramatically. And
or you're missing a vital piece of data architecture, and security. You actually don't really have a plan for how you're going to come up with that.
Exactly, yeah. So you do not want to close out one phase of the system with questions on your design, because I've got a process, I've got a flaw in my process, and I need to redesign it. Don't move it on to the next phase, because you're just limiting your ability to test that process before you go live. So use the windows of testing that you have, which there won't be that many, especially in SaaS implementations. You've probably got 2 or 3 windows of testing. So if you start pushing issues from one window to the next and deferring issues, you're just limiting your ability to actually effectively test it properly. So it is really vital that people don't brush aside issues that to allow the program to continue. Sometimes you have to make those hard calls, don't you? And say, right, let's just stop for a second, let's just fix this, and then allow it to progress.
Yeah, because those windows are only about 2 to 3 weeks at a time, really.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really not long. There's not a lot of time to get these things tested before you set it out upon the world. And Yeah, and these are the things that are going to, pay your suppliers, allow you to collect money, pay your employees, handle all that personal data.
Yeah.
So you've got to
don't take it lightly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and we've talked about setting the bar too high, but you can also set it too low, and you risk going live with a solution that either doesn't work or isn't fit for purpose or has got some horrific hole in it that's going to cause you a major issue once it hits general release. I think it's the test manager has got to be working with the process owners as well, because frankly they're process owners, they're not systems implementers or test managers.
That's right.
So that they've got to give that kind of subject matter expertise and guidance around how various criteria is going to get assessed, who's going to sign it off, and what you'll do if that criteria isn't met. And that's kind of the real value of having a test manager that has been there and done it and seen it a few times before.
Yeah, you definitely don't want the blind leading the blind, do you? So it is. So having someone experienced in any important things that individuals need to test, focus on these things, because don't worry about X, Y, and Z, because that works fine. And actually the system implementers as well have got a role to play in guiding organizations through, okay, what testing are you going to do? But the system implementers are there to sort of, configure the system against the specification. It's up to organizations to test the logic, like we talked about just a minute ago. So the system implementers have got a role to play in sort of guiding organizations to through, okay, these are the key areas that you need to sort of focus your testing resources on, or your testing activities on. But the test manager is the one who's really helping to pull all those plans together to help the process owners to help define, these are the key things that process owner we need to really prioritize here, because these are issues that I've experienced in previous projects that that will cause us pain. So let's really spend a bit of time on these sort of areas, just to provide a little bit of guidance to those process owners. Process owners will then say, okay, I want process to go from A to B in this way, with these various approvals and these are various sort of off-system activities happening, roles and responsibilities of these various people, well described and well articulated and well defined, and that's the role of the process owner. And the test manager sitting there going, okay, how am I going to now create the various test scenarios to meet all of that criteria?
You're listening to the Underscore Transformation podcast. For more practical guidance to business transformation, you can download our transformation checklist at underscore-group.com/insights. Yeah, and I think that the system implementation partners, they can help you with one part of testing, which is verifying that it meets specifications. But they're never going to help you with validating that it's fit for purpose for your business.
Absolutely not.
They will have no clue about that, and don't expect them to help you with it.
Yeah, exactly, and they shouldn't do. It's like
they'd be stepping well beyond their boundaries.
Exactly. Yeah. Who are they to know what's right and wrong for your business? You give me a set of logic and business rules you want me to configure in a system. I have done that.
Yes.
Your role is to make sure that I have configured them correctly. Which sometimes causes a little bit of frustration, because there are inevitably going to be errors in business, in logic that's been created by the system integrators as part of a condition rule or something crazy that they've put into the system to send the process either A or B, through via one channel or another.
Yeah, send approval if it's over this amount instead of if it's under this amount. And it's basic logic that gets switched around as people are working long hours to get stuff configured.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes Sometimes those things happen. So, they don't get configured correctly, but it's human nature. But these are the key things that businesses should be, focusing their testing activities on.
So we've got our sign-off criteria sorted. But what about all the different types of system testing that goes on when you're implementing a new piece of technology? Because some of this language is pretty opaque.
I know, yes. Let's demystify it a little bit, shall we?
Yeah, I think we should just unpack it a bit. We're not going to go into massive amount of detail here, but I think it would help just to do a bit of a quick fire. What are these things? Because you'll hear about it, you'll see it written on plans, and sometimes it can be a bit disconcerting to go, hold on, what is this?
What does
exactly?
That mean?
So let's kind of just take it in order, vaguely chronological order. So let's start with smoke testing. So what is smoke testing?
What a good one to start with. So smoke testing you're basically doing some checks. You're not doing detailed testing. This is your data in a system? Yes. Have I configured, and this will typically be done by the system integrators to start off with, before they hand the system to their client. They'll go in and they'll check to see if I configured all of the functional areas that I need to configure. As the data been loaded, have the integrations been turned on, and they will have a checklist of the things that they need to validate that have been configured. Smoke testing as well comes into play much further down the line, client side. So typically when the system, just prior to a system going into production, some clients may decide to do smoke testing in certain parts of the system prior to turning it on into a live environment, as well as doing perhaps detailed unit testing or whatever in other parts of the system. But I'll come onto unit testing in a second. So to summarize, smoke testing is done by the system integrator prior to giving a prototype to the organization, to the client, for them to do their various sort of unit testing end to end, etc. But can also be done by clients at the very end of the program prior to switching the system into live mode. So they'll go in and just do some validation that the things that the customer is expecting to see in a system are in a system prior to turning it on.
Yeah. So next up is unit testing. So
unit testing,
60,000 view of unit testing.
So unit testing is you're testing in detail. This is where your scenarios, and we talked about a minute ago, where your scenarios for each of the functional areas of your system. So if you're testing the purchasing elements of it, or the finance elements of it, or the recruiting elements, the payroll elements, you're doing detailed testing against the scenarios, not the scripts, but against the scenario, especially in the SaaS mode. We're talking about software as a service. We're not talking about on premise here. But this is where your majority of your effort will go into during testing.
So you can expect a lot of changes in the first round of unit testing, can't you?
Yeah. I mean, this is the first time your design team will fully understand and the decisions that they've made during various workshops. It's the first time that they're seeing the output of that in the technology, in the system. So they are going to identify defects and issues. And wouldn't it be great if we could do this as well? Enhancements, etc. It's not just about fixing defects and issues; it's actually enhancing the experience now.
Yeah. And sometimes, you have a couple of decisions in front of you. We could do it this way or that way. Well, we chose that way, and now we see it in the flesh. Actually, that's not great, is it? That's going to done. We should have gone the other way. It's that evolving, iterative design feedback loop, isn't it? This is unit testing is essential to that iterative approach to design.
And you should do it. You should have all of these types of sort of conversations and discussions and questions in the first iteration of your prototype of your design.
Yeah,
you do not want to be having these types of conversations when you're quite close to go live. It's less than ideal, put it that way.
Yeah.
This is your opportunity to really refine and review the design decisions you've made.
And it's the difference between a defect and an enhancement, isn't it? Really, Des. And so in your first prototype, it's absolutely fine to have maybe even more enhancements than you have defects. But if you're in your second or getting towards your production prototype, if you've still got enhancements going on, then that's a real red flag, isn't it?
Yeah. You do not want to have changes, and the system integrators will typically be really uncomfortable with lots of changes going through, because if you're making enhancements and changes at such a late stage, it just means that you've not taken those changes through the testing cycles that everything else has had. So it is a little bit of a worry bead if you start to sort of see huge amounts of change. And sometimes it is what it is, and it has to be done, because otherwise the user experience will be compromised, etc. So sometimes you have to make these hard decisions. But a test manager and a program lead and a transformation lead, etc., will need to really be very, very careful about making enhancements later in a program, and really signing those off as, okay, these are absolutely critical. They must be done prior to us turning the system on. Or actually, do you know what? They are not critical prior to go live, but they are really great ideas. Let's put into a roadmap that will address it 3-6 months, etc. down the line.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so that's unit testing. Let's move on to security testing.
Yeah, so this is a really, really key testing that needs to be performed. So this is where you're testing the security within typically the system, of course, what users can access, what users can see, the various components of the system that the users can see, and it becomes obviously more important as legislation on data privacy, etc., starts to get tighter and tighter, and tougher on organizations if they should fall foul of it. Look at user rights, and if you look at GDPR now, it's making sure that people are only allowed to see what they should be able to see. So you're going to have those conversations during workshops and design workshops about determining who can see what information about people, about finance, about procurement, whatever.
And we covered it in last week's episode on data, but it's always worth repeating. Before you open up your new system to be tested by a broader audience than just the core project team, make sure you've done all your security testing, and no one's going to see any data they shouldn't see. Yeah,
absolutely. And we also talked about our organizations have got individuals to sign non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, just in case they come across data that they wouldn't typically come across. So something for listeners out there, if you're thinking of inviting individuals from outside your project team into testing, which inevitably you will do as part of UAT, we'll probably come on to that in a second. These individuals may come across data that they wouldn't typically see, so put some restrictions around policy or contracts, etc., that individuals must sign.
That makes sense. So moving on, performance testing.
That's an interesting one, actually, because for smaller organizations, this is probably not something that they will do, because they don't have the volume of transactions that they're putting through, especially with cloud technology that's being used by organizations of significant size. If you're doing something on-premise, probably you want to do performance testing, because obviously you're testing the capabilities of your internal networks, etc.
Have we bought a fast enough server?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but
we've got enough storage.
But a lot of organizations are clearly going down a SaaS route. So if you're a 5 to 10,000 employee business, you probably don't need to worry too much about transactional performance. You do, however, need to worry about reporting performance. Yes. So if you've built a series of reports, they've got lots and lots of complex logic inside them, and you expect these reports to be issued, I don't know, during peak times of usage, then it might affect the performance of the system. So I would suggest that some performance testing is done against reporting, but not on the transactional level, not on transactions. If, however, you're an organization of significant size, 60, 70, 80,000 plus employees, then you have to do performance testing. You have to put thousands of transactions on at the same time and run those reports, run those integrations all at the same time to make sure that the system doesn't collapse. And the system providers will also expect you to do some of those tests, because obviously they don't want to compromise their other client bases, especially if if it's a shared sort of environment with many clients,
it tends to happen if you as much as you have stuff in their cloud, you can have latency issues, especially if you've got large populations in Australia or New Zealand. They tend to get a bit of a bum rap when it comes to internet access to kind of cloud services. So you've got to check this stuff out because it can decimate the performance of your system if you haven't done that. That's something we've had direct experience of.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if they've got a European-based data center and our poor Aussie colleagues are accessing it from down under and struggling with latency, but more recently, a lot of networks and data centers.
It's less of an issue these days. I'm showing my age, aren't I?
Not really, no. But yeah, I'm sure.
In the world of cloud, I'm ancient.
I'm sure somebody will come and say to us, "No, that's still an issue, Joe. You're talking nonsense. We're still experiencing it here in the outback."
Absolutely.
So now, if you've got lots and lots of transactions and lots of employees, absolutely put thousands of simulate a whole load of transactions being put through, but your reporting and integrations, test them to death. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've covered off some different aspects of testing, kind of individual areas of the system. What about when you get to end-to-end testing? What is it? What should we be thinking about?
This is where you're testing all of the various components and making sure that they work seamlessly end-to-end. So your order to cash, your hire to retire, your procure to pay, to ensure that all of the elements of the system work together seamlessly. So it's about getting all those process owners in a room and going, right, okay, there's my hire to retire process. So if I raise a requisition to recruit somebody, take them through the recruitment process, can I hire them? Can I onboard them? Can I then make some changes to their compensation once they're here? So you can see the end. Can I put them on sick? Can I put them on leave of absence, etc.? Can I get them to raise a purchase order? Can I get them to claim expenses? So you can see the entire life cycle of an individual. Can I then terminate the employee? So you can see all of that. What's that end-to-end experience going to look like? And then again, as you're seeing that end-to-end experience, you will have integrations that will kick off as certain events happen. So I've recruited somebody now, I've hired somebody, I've onboarded somebody, so maybe I'm going to issue a series of integrations to inform other downstream systems that this employee has arrived. Are those integrations kicking in or not? So it's about joining up not just the process, and it's also about testing that those integrations are working, that those reports are working and being distributed against the schedules that you've created, and that this Donald Duck hire that you've put through the system has ended up in the downstream systems, and ultimately you terminate your Donald Duck, and that Donald Duck disappears from the downstream systems that you were integrating with. So it is a really, really key testing phase. So do not underestimate this. And this is not unit testing. This is about joining the dots. And a lot of organizations that a lot of individuals I've spoken to don't approach it that way. They're still approaching unit testing, but they try to join one or two areas of the process.
Yes,
so, okay, we've done an end-to-end. So we've now done a recruitment and I've now hired, but now actually you haven't onboarded, you haven't done a life cycle change, et cetera, et cetera.
So, yeah, and this is where all your off system comes in, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. All your policies are coming in, your processes, your handoffs, making sure that your standard operating procedures there for each of your teams, the documents, the guides, that each of the teams and individuals, and each of the teams that are supporting those processes. So maybe the payroll team have got their processes and their guides about how they need to process somebody into payroll. It's at this point that you start to document that and get it well, to a level of detail that allows you to then train those users and those teams in the use of the system, really.
Yeah, it's an area that, as you say, people often just focus on the system and just do more unit testing rather than properly joining it up end to end. So before we kind of just wrap up on this, we've just got 2 or 3 more to go, but I think we'll get to UAT, so user acceptance testing. But one I know that's dear to your heart, parallel testing.
Parallel testing, yes. The purpose of parallel testing is to verify that the two systems can complete complex calculations or operations with the exact same results. So, things like in payroll, for instance, your gross to net calculations are the exact matches between the two systems.
Yeah.
There are some tolerances. You will always have some tolerances of a penny here and a penny there, but largely they're going to be, I'm running my payroll in one system and I'm running the payroll in my new system and the results are exactly the same.
Yeah.
That's the purposes of parallel. You're not using parallel testing to test the configuration of your payroll engine. That's not what you're doing. You're testing that the calculations of your payroll are exactly the same in both systems. You would have done your configuration testing during your unit testing, of course, and during your end-to-end. This is where you're going to test that the payroll systems and maybe even the finance systems, if you're doing parallels in finance too.
Yeah.
You're using your unit testing to make sure that the configuration and the elements are all working correctly and so on. This is to make sure that the calculations, when you pull all of it together, all the various components of a payroll, for instance, you've got your earnings, your deductions, your taxes, et cetera, all of that. When you're pushing your payroll through, all of that calculates well.
Yeah. And where you do identify discrepancies as you're going through your parallel testing, what happens next? What's the process on that? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, you have to you have to understand and triage why do we have differences. Okay, so and the differences may well be due to configuration, for instance, maybe data, actually some data issues between systems. And in some cases, actually, some organizations actually find that the legacy system in which they were operating their payroll and their finance actually weren't correct.
Yes.
And be surprised how many times that happens, which actually gives the organization a different set of problems. Okay, we've now just found an issue in our legacy system. What are we going to do? Because this issue goes back 6 months, 3 years, 10 years. Where individuals perhaps been miscalculated, etc.
Yeah, or even worse, their pension contributions have been misallocated,
exactly.
Under or overpaid, or
that's the sponsor's worst nightmare is hearing that news. Actually, our new system is going to work beautifully, but your legacy system, however, we found this issue.
Yes,
So you are going to come up with differences. Some differences are differences that you have to fix because actually there are some you've now identified that there's an issue with the configuration of the system that's causing that difference to occur between the two systems. So my maternity pay isn't matching between the two systems, and it's because there's a calculation rule in my new system that hasn't been configured correctly, etc. Okay, fine. Let's fix that now. Let's unit test it. Let's rerun the parallel data to see if it's addressed all of the issues. And then you're going to have some other ones that you go, do you know what? There's an allowance, clothing allowance that we forgot to load to 500 employees that's causing a difference of X.
Yeah.
We know that's a known difference. We can live with that.
Gotcha.
So it is about understanding, okay, what are the differences there are configuration differences that you have to fix your configuration. You have to run them through again and to make sure that the issues are addressed. And then there are those other ones that maybe have been a data load issue that you just, human error against, we're all humans. Sometimes these things happen. Yeah. You get, do you know what, for those 500, I understand why we have a difference. As long as the exec and the governance of the program are comfortable with those parameters that you've set in your parallel. So you're going to identify what are your levels of tolerance in your payroll. So some organizations will say, now I want my tolerance to be to all issues, anything over 10 pence on net pay or on gross pay will need to be justified. Other organizations are perhaps a little bit more relaxed. So again, it depends on the organization's appetite for risk. That's what it means.
And in terms of those number of parallel runs, how many different test cycles should you be running in parallel?
A minimum
in parallel, but how many parallel test runs should you have?
A minimum of 2. A minimum of 2. And if you've got serious issues with your second one, you have to run a third one.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I think there's this whole area for anybody that's listening here. This is highly specialized, complex, detailed work. This whole area of payroll implementation, payroll parallel testing. So really do get external assurance from people that have got real hands-on operational experience of your new payroll system if you possibly can, because it can save you a huge amount of time, as well as really reducing the risk associated with potentially going live with a payroll system that hasn't been properly fully tested. So we've covered parallel. The next phase on from parallel, or does it run in parallel with parallel testing? Is UAT. So user acceptance testing.
Yeah, this is where you're bringing individuals from across the organization to test your processes, your system. Making sure if it's fit for purpose from their perspective. It comes towards the end of your system implementation.
It's really about validating that this is fit for purpose. It's going to work in all these different areas of the business, and the user experience makes sense, and it's not cause operational issues as this thing goes live. If they're finding defects and design enhancements during UAT, you've got real issues.
Yeah,
Hopefully, you're not going to get too many of that.
Nah, you need to. This shouldn't be the first time that the end user will experience the system. You should bring some end users into during your end-to-end, or maybe even unit testing, providing the caveat that with providing you've tested security to death, right? So you don't get individuals that you're bringing into your system that hasn't been yet unit tested. It's dangerous. So you do your unit testing, then invite individuals, or maybe do through presentation, etc. Showcase what you've designed, and so they're not seeing the system for the first time. Do a demo. This is what we've designed. What do you think? If we missed anything, get their input into during unit testing. Into if you've not thought about X, Y, and Z. Oh, okay, fine. I'll iterate my design. Then during end-to-end testing, again, you do what we've described earlier, and then you bring your user community to have a play. As I said, it's not the first time that they will have seen the system, because you want them to have some sort of familiarity to avoid exactly what you just said, Jason. Oh, I want to raise all of these defects and issues, because actually they're not real defects, not real issues. They're just user misunderstanding. So if you have them involved earlier on, it'll just help your UAT process, and it'll make your UAT process much more effective, because you ultimately want constructive feedback and a level of confidence from that end user that what you're doing will land in the organization, will be adopted, and will be used by individuals. The user experience will be great, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we're going to do now is we're going to draw it to a close here for this week's session. Testing is a vast topic, and we've got more to cover. But I think we've kind of talked about all those major phases within testing, the importance of getting the right test manager on board, the key documentation. But we do have a bit more to cover, and I'm very mindful that there's only so much people can handle in terms of testing in any one sitting. But we will come back to this next week and go through just a bit more detail around some of those really key areas, because get this right, and you will go live with something that is really fit for purpose, is not going to cause you any operational issues, and ultimately is going to deliver the business case that you've committed to implement this new technology and this transformational change. So please do listen in next week for the second part of our deep dive on testing, and we look forward to talking to you then.
Thanks for listening. We really appreciate your support. So this episode focused on 1 of 10 critical success factors in the build phase of transformation. If you'd like to be at the front of the queue for next week's episode, please hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to like the show if you found it useful.